Wait, you said turn around.
We're at St. John's, Providence, and if you take a look that way, this is actually the ocean floor. This is the ocean floor here where you see the people walking. And let me stand over here. And what happens is, we're actually at the bottom of the ocean. This is the bottom of the ocean here.
Uh-huh.
And what happens is the water recedes. It takes 6 hours for the water to recede. If you look at the caves there, you see the sea moss on the bottom over here. The sea moss. Probably you can see it on the ground here too. Sea moss here. All this is wet sea moss and all of this. Now, originally, this cave is, if you look that way, that's a cave. According to the scientists, this cave is over 150 million years old. But the Native Americans lived in this area, and what they would do, it's one of the charms that they used was these rocks. And these smooth rocks that was caused by the receding waters, and then when the water filled back up, it would make the rocks feel smooth. Mm-hmm. When the rocks were smooth, they would have these designs on the lines. So they would look at the lines on the rocks, and if you would find a rock with a line around it, or 2 lines or 3 lines, or whatever it was, you get to make a wish, and that wish was said to have come true. So the indigenous folks lived in this area, but not here, because here is actually the bottom of the ocean. The water had receded. Now, if you look at the cave, and then look up, you can see how deep the water is going to be by 6 o'clock. By 6, 7 o'clock, this will all be filled. You would not be able to know that this cave is here. It's an underwater cave.
Ooh.
Now, if you look over here, you can also see how deep it might look.
So this is probably where people get sucked in at.
It could be, but guess what? These caves, the Moors would bury their treasures in caves like this. So when the water receded, they put their treasures in the ground here in these caves, and it would be hidden because it would flood back up and no one would think to look in here. You see? So that's what the reason was for actually where we get buried treasure, which we're going to talk about when we go to Nova Scotia also.
I'm going to take a walk.
But let's walk down here, and you'll see seaweed on the ground, seaweed on the walls.
Okay, where the bats at?
Captain Kidd, actually, when the water receded, they buried the treasures in various areas here. The water would fill back up, and you would never be able to find the treasure. Only they knew where it was. This is one of the caves.
I think I want to get a rock from here and make a necklace.
See how it just chips right off? You could have a cave in. See?
Baby, take that. That's going to be a necklace for you.
It's too weak, see? It just comes right off.
Okay.
It's like mud.
Oh.
And you can see how the water makes these lines, just like they make the smooth rocks. It's actually smoothing these rocks out.
Wow.
Because the water is constantly coming in and out. I know. Now, if we stood here till about 7 o'clock, this would all be filled up. And the treasures that the Moors buried would be concealed. So if you went looking for treasures, you'd be digging up dirt under the trees or whatever. It's underwater.
Wow.
Under the mud.
Yes.
You see?
Beautiful.
And of course, if you look at the ceiling over here, you can see the sea moss. It's evidence of underwater.
Yeah.
Now, this is different from
The layering is gorgeous.
this sea level. This ground here is different from where we would find sand. Sand is actually made from the parrotfish.
Scooch over just a tiny bit.
See, the parrotfish, that means that there were no parrotfish that lived in this area. Because parrotfish eat shellfish, and their excrement is made of sand, and that's where all the sand you get in Egypt and around the world is actually excrement from parrotfish. So they didn't live in this area.
Okay.
You see, this is whale country. This is where we have the whale shark. They come up here, and I believe it's this time of the year actually. The blue whale and the humpback whale.
I love it.
This is part of the cave. What is this cave? It's about, it had to be at least, this looks like about 30 feet or more from top to bottom. Now what we're going to do, now what we're going to do is try to find some of those rocks that the Native Americans used to,
Then a quote unquote.
the types of treasures that were buried here in this part when the ocean water receded, silver and gold, doubloons, coins like this one.
Like, let me see that coin book. It's a little dark in here, but
Silver and gold is true currency.
okay.
Okay, these are 999 silver. We have the Tupi coin with the buffalo on the back. We also have the American eagle, which the eagle, the bald eagle actually is prevalent in this whole area, and the moose.
Okay.
You see, the moose and the bald eagle. So the bald eagle also has a tie to Native American pantheon. Sea moss. Let you know on the water. Now,
Rochelle, we can't see you. Step out a bit, Rochelle.
this was actually eaten by the Native Americans. Red clay was actually eaten. It was actually very healthy.
Let me taste it.
It was actually very healthy. And we just had some of this here. We just ate some of this seaweed, and it's heavy in iodine. For anyone who might have a thyroid problem, this is where you would find this type of plant.
Taste it, boo boo. No.
Let's see.
Don't
Let's
swallow.
try a small piece. It tastes just like the seaweed we just ate. Interesting.
Oh, okay.
So you can see it looks like little pods in here, which is amazing. I bet you if we took this home, we'd be healthy for the rest of our lives. And I wouldn't have a thyroid condition anymore. That's for sure.
Yes, that seaweed is excellent for thyroids.
Awesome. When I can make the most wonderful jewelry, just dip this in resin and it's on. Wow. I love it. It's amazing. You know, it almost looks like snow peas.
Mm-hmm. It tastes just like the stuff.
It does? Okay.
Now here is a rock in the middle of the cave, of the entrance of the cave, filled with this beautiful seaweed, which is, like I said earlier, awesome for the thyroids. This is some powerful stuff here, free in nature, grows out of a rock.
Baby, get a shopping bag so we can take some home with us now.
And it's not processed, straight from the ocean. Dry it out, good to go. And you know what? We're gonna get some of this stuff. Take some of this stuff. Seaweed.
No, get us by this piece.
There's another cave.
There.
You can see, if you look up there, you can see the depth of the water
I was in there
when it
already.
comes, when the water comes in.
Yeah, okay,
This is
guys,
all, this is the
good, 'cause I
bottom
can see
of the
the mountain.
ocean that
Elliot,
we're
turn
standing
around.
on. This is the bottom of the ocean up
Gorgeous.
here in
Okay,
Canada,
look at it.
which is very close. If you look over there, that's Nova Scotia.
Wait, one
Nova
more. Oh,
Scotia.
this is better.
Over that
Like the
landmass
whole
over there,
cave.
beyond the water.
Good. Thank you.
Nova Scotia over here.
I like that one.
We see
there.
that hill.
That jaggy.
Is we're at Captain Kidd, which is only one of the pirates' buried treasure. We're going to look at that too. But let's go. Let's check out this cave here. You can see more seaweed on the ground here. And I'm going to go stand over there so you can see how high the water actually gets and how big that cave opening is. So pause it.
Wow.
Got the whole picture?
Yep, I got the whole picture.
You need to look at this limestone over here. Come and check out this stone and turn it off.
Okay, I'm going to check out the limestone now. Come with me. I'll turn you off for a minute, but you're not going to know that I turned you off. But, bye.
Now, one of the most interesting things is that there are no fish. When the water recedes, the fish are smart enough, and the crustacean, which is lobster, crab, and so forth, know that this area here, whales, I mean, there are all kinds of sardines that live up here. They all know to go back with the tide. Now, what's interesting also, the tide goes both ways. It comes in and go out, and they meet. It's sort of like the Nile River. The Nile River flows upward and downward, and that is known as the god Hapi. It does the same thing right here in this Native American land here, right here in Canada. If you notice here, the sea moss and the seaweed covers these rocks. These are healing rocks. You take a rock like this, you would take a rock such as this one here. And you would put that in your bath water. You just put it in the bath water. It's a beautiful, and see it's kind of wet now, so it feels slippery. But what happens is it dries out. And what happens is you just put it right in your bath water. It also it's made of the red clay. It's just a wonderful, wonderful healing rock. We're gonna take some of these home.
Okay, baby.
Let's go. Okay, now there's a little stream of water that I have to pass through to get back up on where the water does not actually overcome the land. Are you waiting for me? Now here's one of the rocks here that has these lines on them. They could have up to 3 or 4 lines on them, but the ones with the lines on them like this, that go all the way around the rock, signify a wish. But it also has, with the other lines, a form of divination and what they meant, different things when you put them all together.
French at that time were enslaved black people. In the French army and in the French Navy, there are numerous free African men serving also. Now, the book that's making its way around the motor coach now, this here is a book put out by the BBI, which is the Black Business Initiative. And it's an organization here in Nova Scotia set up to help the African Nova Scotians get their businesses off the ground. In this, you'll probably find about 97% of the African Nova Scotian businesses here in the province. Now, I'm going to be handing some things out. If I hand it on the right side, just send it straight back. When it gets to the back, it can cross over and then make its way forward. If I hand it back on the left, then just reverse that.
Can we purchase that at the museum?
No, you cannot purchase that book at the Black Cultural Center. But if you go home and you Google Black Business Initiative, you should be able to get contact information to purchase those books. Though the BBI, they put those books out for free, so if you send them a self-addressed stamped envelope and postage, etc., I'm pretty sure they'll send one to you. I do know there's one lady around here that has hundreds of those in their books, but they have put them out for free each year. Now, the city of Halifax itself was founded in the summer of 1749, more or less as a base to protect the city of Boston from the French in the northern part of the province and the fortress of Louisbourg. Now, when the British came here in 1749, they were more or less used to the climate down in the southern states. So when they came here, they were very ill prepared for the cold Canadian winter. Now, when the British came here, they brought over hundreds of enslaved Africans, but not all of the black people that came in with the British at that time were enslaved black people. And we know this because the British were very ill prepared for the winter, and they barely survived that winter. So the following spring, the local government were handing out provisions to the survivors. As they were handing out provisions to the survivors, they were taking down a description of who they were giving the provisions to. Listed in the archives of Nova Scotia, listed between 15 to 20, either listed as black or as African. Now, had they been enslaved black people, their provisions would have gone to their masters, and there would have been no record of these here people. Now, the first major influx of black people into the province of Nova Scotia was a result of conflict or war. Now, aside from the lady that read the book, does anybody know what conflict or war this was?
We were told to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, the American Revolution. Now, when the American Revolution broke out, the British half-heartedly issued a proclamation to any rebel-owned slave. And what I mean by rebel-owned slave, those rebelling against the British Crown, that if their slaves escaped to the British side, serve in the British forces, then them as a private would receive the minimum 100 acres and a mule. If they attained the rank of corporal, they get 150 acres and a mule, going all the way up to sergeant and getting 250 acres and a mule. Now you're all familiar with the whole 40 acres and a mule? Okay, well that American general bore that promise that was made by the British general during the American Revolution. Now I said half-heartedly because when the British made that promise, they really didn't mean it. Mm-hmm. Now, 1 week after the British making that promise, then over 3,000 black men flee to the British lines, and they had enough to form what was known as the Ethiopian Regiment. Now, during the American Revolution, the Ethiopian Regiment was the only all-black militia unit fighting on the side of the British against the rebel colonies. Now, as a result of the Americans winning the war, between 1776 and 1785, 40 to 50,000 Empire loyalists, as they're known. Now, the single largest influx of immigrants into the province of Nova Scotia was a result of the American Revolution. 40 to 50,000 fled the United States and settled here in Nova Scotia. Out of these 40 to 50,000, about 3,500 were known as black loyalists, or those that had made the special trek to the British lines and served in the British forces. Now, at that time, Nova Scotia itself was still a slave society, and it was very difficult to tell free black person from enslaved black person. Now, these black loyalists had to carry what were known as passports or Birchtown certificates. Now, making its way around the motor coach now are examples of these passports that these African or that these black people had to keep on them. Now, if you take a look at the top where you see Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management, if you go home and Google Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management, go to their virtual exhibits, and then go to their exhibits, African Nova Scotians in the Age of Slavery and Abolition, you can print off what is making its way around the motor coach now. Now,
Excuse me.
coming up,
You can turn the volume down a little bit.
Okay.
now right here on the left, this here is the home of the most popular beer here in Nova Scotia, Keith's India Pale Ale. Now, Alexander Keith himself was a slave owner. Now, during the American Civil War, the Keiths family, as well as a lot of other prominent families in the south end of Halifax, they supported the Confederacy. The large glass building here on the right, this here is known as Summit Place. In 1995, it was the home of the G7 World Summit meeting. So we had all the world leaders here in the city at that time.
You could get in there.
Yeah.
Now, earlier this summer, the province of Nova Scotia had a Tall Ships Festival. And currently, right now, the Nova Scotia Busker Festival is going on in the city of Halifax. Now, right beside Summit Place here is the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, a museum set up and dedicated to life on the sea. Now, the Africville Genealogical Society, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, and the Black Cultural Society, they co-jointly, for the past 4 years, brought the Freedom Schooner, La Amistad, here to Nova Scotia. You folks are familiar with the Amistad? Okay. So it has been here. Now, the profile making its way around the province, around the motor coach right now, and you'll see him on the cover of the BBI magazine. This here is Percy Paris, and he's currently the only African Nova Scotian member of the Legislative Assembly, or he's the only black politician here in Nova Scotia. Now, as a result of the United Empire Loyalists coming to the province of Nova Scotia, their priority was to take care of those that lost the most as a result of the displacement. Or that was their way of saying, we're going to take care of the white loyalists first, then eventually we'll get to you black loyalists. To keep the black loyalists not thinking about their land or their mule, they had the black loyalists going around the province of Nova Scotia, building the government roads and the government buildings. Eventually they did get to the black loyalists, and they eventually did get to some of the black loyalists, and some of the black loyalists got some land. It averaged out between 10 to 15 acres, and of course, no mule. Now, the black Nova Scotians, or the black loyalists here, they were discriminated against, and due to the fact that the government was very tardy in issuing their land, in 1792, 1/3 of the black loyalist population weren't happy, so they wanted someplace else to go. Aside from the lady that read the book, does anybody have a guess as to where? Huh?
They went into the wilderness.
No. What was happening at the time, the British government, the Nova Scotia government, then this company called the Sierra Leone Company, what they were trying to do was start a trilateral trade route by having a free colony of English-speaking black people on the west coast of Africa. So on January 15th, 1792, 1,192 women boarded 15 ships, men and women boarded 15 ships in Halifax Harbor and went and settled Freetown, Sierra Leone. Now, the section of the city that we're entering now is known as historic properties. All these buildings date back to the late 1700s and the early 1800s. In the 1960s, they wanted to tear them all down, but instead of, they came up with this rebuilding project to help preserve them for the shops, restaurants, and offices that you see here today. Now, I don't know if any of you folks took any of the other tours earlier today, but if you take a look at these buildings coming up on the left, I don't know if you can see the blue oval plaques. Any building that you see that has one of those blue oval plaques signify that building as a National Historic Site, and therefore it cannot be destroyed or altered. The new Marriott Hotel here on the right, formerly the Sheraton Hotel, formerly the Casino Hotel, and I think they had about 4 other owners in the past 7 years. The Purdy's Wharf Tower is here on the right, or as some like to call these office buildings, the milk cartons, and they get that nickname from their configuration. Also coming up on the right is the Casino Nova Scotia, one of 2 legal casinos here in the province of Nova Scotia. The other is in the northern city of Sydney. This casino is open 364 days a year, closed on Christmas. Although if you folks want to come ashore and do some gambling, well, Joe and I got loaded dice and marked cards, and we'll play some games with you. You're going to lose because we got bills to pay. Now, where you see the Navy ships to the right, this year is known as the Halifax Dockyards. Now, the Halifax Dockyards are Canada's East Coast Naval Headquarters, and they've been in continuous operation since 1752. Now, after the Black Loyalists came and left, the next major influx of black people in the province was again a result of conflict. This was in 1796, and these were the Trelawney Jamaican Maroons. Now, I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with your Maroon history. Well, in 1796, the white governor here in Nova Scotia, John G. Wentworth, was afraid that this French dictator was going to attack Halifax. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with when Napoleon went to attack Boston. Well, he picked Boston over Halifax because the Maroons were here. Now, John G. Wentworth was afraid that this dictator was going to attack Halifax. He was also aware of the situation of the Trelawney Jamaican Maroons. Now, over quite a few years, there were various Maroon wars in Jamaica. After the Third Maroon War, they finally signed a treaty and had peace. Now, the British were expanding their territory, or they were wanting more land in Jamaica. So they said that Trelawney Jamaican Maroons broke the treaty. They didn't. That was just the British excuse for kicking them off their land. Now, John G. Wentworth was aware of this, but he was also aware of the fighting tenacity of the Haitian Maroons. So he sort of tricked or convinced 550 to 600 men and women from Trelawney to come here to the province of Nova Scotia. When they did, they were that much of a deterrent to Napoleon Bonaparte. So he went and attacked Boston as opposed to Halifax because the Maroons were here. Now, like the Black Loyalists before them, the Maroons were discriminated against. The Maroons had different religious and marriage practices in Jamaica. Now, when they got here, the Nova Scotia government wanted to impose a lot of restrictions on them. And due to the fact that the climate was a little bit different between Nova Scotia and Jamaica. So after 4 years, the majority of the Trelawney Jamaican Maroons wanted someplace else to go. Does anybody have a guess as to where?
United States.
No? No, not back to Jamaica. Remember the Black Loyalists that went to Sierra Leone earlier? They weren't happy about their situation, so they started a rebellion. So they relocated the majority of the Jamaican Maroons from here in Nova Scotia to Freetown, Sierra Leone, to put down the fighting and the conflict that was going on. Now, the bridge that you see there, that there is the Angus L. MacDonald Bridge, or as others like to call it, the Old Bridge. And some even like to call it the Cursed Bridge. Why is it cursed? Well, ever since the mid-1700s, there's been a bridge across the Halifax Harbor. When the first original wooden bridge was under construction, one of the construction workers fell in love with one of the daughters of a local First Nations people, the Big Ma. Her father, the chief, didn't like that union so much, so he put a curse on the bridge. The first bridge was destroyed as a result of fire, strike number 1. So then they built a replacement bridge. On a beautiful sunny day, well, pretty much like today, that replacement bridge, it just fell, strike number 2. So we're just waiting for this third bridge here to collapse now.
Well, hopefully not today, though.
37? You got the word on this.
Actually, I'm just kidding. Before they opened this modern structure that we're traveling across in 1956, they had another Mi'kmaq elder come in and remove the curse. So we hope or pray that this here bridge is safe. This here bridge is just over a mile long, and it connects us to Halifax's sister city, the city of Dartmouth. Now, the city of Dartmouth was founded 1 year after the founding of the city of Halifax in 1750. And it was originally 355 settlers from Gravesend in Plymouth, England. Now, after the Jamaican Maroons came and left, the next major influx of black people into the province was again a result of conflict or war. Aside from the lady that read the book, does anybody know what conflict or war this may have been? No, it was earlier than the Civil War. About 40 years earlier, roughly 40 years earlier than the Civil War. Right, the War of 1812. Between 1813 and 1815, 2,100 black war refugees from the Chesapeake Bay, Delaware, Baltimore area of the United States, they came here to Nova Scotia. They were first quarantined at a place called Melville Island, then eventually they were relocated to the black communities of Beachville, Lucasville, Hammonds Plains, as well as Africville. Now, just a little sidebar. Alcohol here in the province of Nova Scotia, that is a racket controlled by the provincial government. And you can only go to a special provincial government-run liquor store, such as this one you see right over here, NSLC, Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. The legal drinking age is 19 years of age. Although drinking and driving is illegal and a problem, at some of the government-run liquor stores, that one right over there, they have a drive-through window.
But it's illegal.
Yeah.
Wait for you on the outside.
It's against the law to drink and drive, but they have a drive-through window. Now, after the black refugees, we have what are known as the late arrivals. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, we had mainly Caribbean immigrants from St. Kitts, Barbados, St. Lucia, Guyana. They came here to the province of Nova Scotia, mainly settling up on Cape Breton Island to go to work in the steel and coal industries of Cape Breton Island. Now, out of a total population of Nova Scotia of just under 1 million, the population of those of African descent is around 37 to 39,000, with an indigenous black population of around 27 to 28,000. And what I mean by indigenous black Nova Scotians, those who can trace their ancestry back to the black loyalists, the Jamaican Maroons, the black refugees, or the late arrivals. Now, the province of Nova Scotia is the first and only province in the country of Canada to appoint an African Canadian, or in this particular case, an African Nova Scotian woman to the position of Lieutenant Governor. And the Lieutenant Governor is the Queen's representative for the province of Nova Scotia. You'll see the Esso service station there to the right, or to the left. You folks may recognize it as Exxon Mobil. We have regulated gas here in the province of Nova Scotia, and I don't know if you noticed the price, but it was $1.5.4.
Wow.
That's what we pay for a gallon of gas here in Nova Scotia.
Wow.
No, I'm just kidding. That's what we pay for a liter. To get what you pay for a gallon, you take that $5.4 and multiply it by 4.1 or 4.2.
Were there any intermarrying? I'm just wondering if they maintain their African features and Jamaican features for the most part.
Do I?
Well,
Not to be smart, but do I maintain my African features, or?
you did.
I mean, I can trace my roots here in Nova Scotia back to the black loyalists.
Oh.
And my great-grandfather on my grandmother's side, or my father's grandfather, was half Mi'kmaq and half black. He grew up on a reservation. He could speak the native tongue. He could make bows and arrows and all that other stuff. Now, when you go up to north, like in the Preston area, and particularly when you go over to when we get over to Africville, you can see like the name Grant. They can trace that back to the Jamaican Maroons. Plus, there isn't an African Nova Scotian here in Nova Scotia that doesn't have some Mi'kmaq blood or First Nations blood in them. So yeah, and Grant is they consider a Maroon name. Simmons. If you were to well, yeah, Simmons is quite a popular name here in Nova Scotia. Now, we will be going up to North Preston, which is the largest Indigenous Black community, and I don't know how many people we'll see, because some of them will be at work. But you can sort of tell those that have maroon blood, just because, well, they're a bit darker.
You said the Bartons can trace there?
Well, no, there are Bartons here in Nova Scotia. So, Cromwell, Mitchell, O'Ree, Jackson, Jacqueline, Simmons, Smith, Barton, Carvery, Downey, Willis, Williams, Bernard. Those are just some of the African Nova Scotian names I can list off the top of my head.
I think those also sound like Iroquois names too.
A little bit less Iroquois. But if you were to go to, many people from Freetown, Sierra Leone have come back to Nova Scotia, tracing their roots. And many of the African Nova Scotia names, you'll find those same names in the Creole culture of Freetown, Sierra Leone. And that's Creole, K-R-I-O, not Creole like you might be more familiar with. And the Creole culture of Freetown, Sierra Leone is a combination of the indigenous Africans, the black loyalists, and the Jamaican Maroons that have gone there and mixed together. Now, the provincial tree here in Nova Scotia is the red spruce tree. The provincial dog is the duck-tolling retriever, and some say that's Canada's only true real breed. The provincial bird is the osprey. Does anyone have a guess as to what the provincial flower may be?
Maple leaf.
No, the leaf's a leaf, not a flower. The mayflower is the provincial flower, and the provincial berry is a wild blueberry. And of course, we celebrate Black History Month here in Nova Scotia, although it's known as African Heritage Month. And the brochure making its way around was produced by the Department of African Nova Scotian Affairs. Now, due to the long and historic history of African Nova Scotians here in Nova Scotia, the province of Nova Scotia is the only province in the country of Canada to have a Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs. Now, also on the back of this brochure, you'll see a list of the various other African Heritage Month collaborators. Oops, sorry.
I'm trying to help you out. I'm trying to help them.
I trust you don't do February as your African American.
We're actually called African Canadians, to be specific, but February is African Heritage Month or Black History Month. Now, when you get to the Black Cultural Center, the Chief Curator, Dr. Henry Bishop, is going to give a brief presentation, and you're going to hear about the history of the Black Baptist churches. Now, over the years, the Black Baptist churches here in Nova Scotia They have been known for setting records for the most number of people baptized at one time. Now this here picture of the black baptism was taking place right up here on this here side on the right. Now, the Black Baptist churches are on the left. Now, the Black Baptist churches, way back in the mid-1800s, they set a record for having the most black people, the most people baptized at once, with 20. And a few years later, they set that record again by having 40 people. And they set that record again a few years later by having 60 people. And I believe the record stands at, now right where those houses end, that's where that picture was taking place. Now, I believe the record was held where they had like 160 African Nova Scotians baptized at one time. We're passing by the two largest lakes in the city of Lakes, Lake Mi'kmaq and Lake Bannock. Where you see that green building to the right, that there's the Atlantic Superstore. That there's a local grocery store chain servicing Atlantic Canada. All right, that's where we go to get our groceries. Now, that would be in direct competition with the Sobeys Superstore, or Sobeys grocery store coming up also on the right. And as we make our way through this here set of lights coming up, just on the other side of the new Hooters, particularly for your ladies, you'll see Ebony Hair Salon, considered the premier black beauty salon here in the metro area. Although I hear they give a pretty tight fade there also. The present temperature today is around 22 degrees Celsius. What is that Fahrenheit? Well, you take the 22, multiply it by 4, divide by 5, and then do something with a 32.
Yes.
Or I don't know what it is Fahrenheit, in other words. Although us here in Canada, like most of the rest of the civilized world, we're on the metric system.
76 if it's 22.
Joe,
We heard that.
Joe told me it's 76 degrees if it's 22.
You double 22 and you add 32.
Well, that gives you a rough estimate. It's not the actual. Of course, Mickey D's here on the right. Although, what's the difference between American McDonald's and Canadian McDonald's? If you look to the center of the Golden Arches, there's a red maple leaf. And, well, yeah, and then there's the McLobster sandwich also.
The McLobster? Wow. I gotta try that. I gotta try that.
Now, somebody else.
Well, in the McLobster sandwich, it's rather expensive and you don't get a lot of lobster meat, so. But I didn't tell you that. Oh, no problem. See the Akerley campus of the Nova Scotia Community College. Now, for your son or daughter to take a 1 or 2 year diploma program at this community college will cost you around $2,000 to $3,000 Canadian a year. Now, the Akerley campus is the only campus in the province of Nova Scotia that has an Afrocentric learning program for those former African Nova Scotian students that couldn't make it through the regular high school system. Now, to attend university in the province of Nova Scotia, it's the most expensive province in the country, Canada. For a 4-year university degree, you'll be looking to spend around $44,000 to $46,000 Canadian, or roughly around $11,000 to $12,000 a year. Although for well, if you think that's cheap, you can take my student loan payments off my hands. Now, for some reason, 4-year degrees tend to take 5 years at the most expensive university, Acadia University in the Annapolis Valley. Although I think it has something to do with Acadia University having the largest beer consumption per capita in North America, consuming more beer than UCLA. Now, there are 11 degree granting institutions in the province of Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Well, when that unit was first mustered during the American Civil War, there were numerous African Canadians, or in particularly African Nova Scotians, in the first unit, as well as the subsequent 55th Massachusetts Regiment and the 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. Now, you folks are familiar with the Buffalo Soldiers?
Yes.
Okay. Well, when they were mustered during Reconstruction, there were 2 black men from the city of Halifax in that first original unit. And Malcolm X vacationed here in Nova Scotia for a summer when he was 14. And we also had a visit from Marcus Garvey. When he was here, he set up 2 UNIA offices. One here in the metro area, and the other one up on Cape Breton Island. Although the one here in the metro area is now defunct, although the one in Cape Breton Island is still growing. Now, you folks are familiar with Matthew Henson and his sidekick Admiral Perry?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have his picture.
Oh, okay.
The original card.
Well, there's an actual picture of Matthew Henson and Admiral Perry on the deck of their ship in the North Sydney Harbor here in Nova Scotia on their initial voyage to the North Pole.
I have his original tobacco card. Oh, really? The one that they copied.
Oh, nobody here has any questions or anything? Not yet, anyway, right?
Let's go to the drive-through liquor store.
That's if we get a little too big.
The population of indigenous African Nova Scotians is around 26 to 29,000, with a total black population here in Nova Scotia at around 37 to 39,000, with a total population of Nova Scotia at just under 1 million. Now, I don't know if you remember when we passed those 2 lakes back there.
Yes.
Well, from where those 2 lakes are to where we are now, and the kilometers further past where we're going, when the black loyalists arrived in the 1780s, this here was known as the Preston area, or the area allotted to the black settlers, or the black loyalists. Now they are more or less relegated to 3 separate communities: East Preston, North Preston, and Cherrybrook Lake Loon. Although where we're going now, more or less once we get on the other side of this here set of lights, this here would be the largest concentration of black people in the province of Nova Scotia. In this area, there'd be no more than 17,000, and the majority of them owning their own land.
On the other side of this light, you said?
Yeah. And we'll be taking a 2-minute photo stop at the church up there.
Where would this be?
Huh?
Where would this be?
North Preston?
North Preston? Okay.
I'll point you in the right direction.
North Preston, or turn left?
Yeah, I'll.
Okay. It's just after.
Here on the left, this here is the Dartmouth Memorial Gardens. Should you visit the Dartmouth Memorial Gardens, inside of it you'll find a plaque set up in dedication of memory of the Jamaican Maroons.
What accounts for one black politician in all of I mean, other than the obvious people don't vote. I mean, what's
Nobody voted for the other 5 that ran, or they didn't get enough votes. We're going off to the community of North Preston, and this gentleman here, Dwayne A. Provo, he is from the community of North Preston, but he ran in the last provincial election, in the previous provincial election, as a progressive conservative.
I would have voted for it.
As a progressive conservative.
What is a progressive conservative?
The Progressive Conservatives is one of the political parties. They're, I don't know how to compare it to the American parties, but now right here on the right, this here is the current day home for the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children. Way back in the now coming up on the right, the light brown building set back from the road, that there is the original Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, and that was opened June 6, 1921. Now, in the late 1800s, in the mid to late 1800s, there was discrimination at the Catholic orphanage, discrimination at the Protestant orphanage. Then as a result of the Halifax explosion, there was a need for the African Nova Scotians to have their own separate orphanage. So on June 26th, they opened that their home as the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children.
Take a right or left at these here lights.
What are they, orphans?
Now, yeah. Now, at the modern day home, it still has the name of Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children. The administration and the counselors are African Nova Scotian, but the majority of the troubled young people there are not African Nova Scotian. Now, the road that we're traveling on now is known as Lake Major Road. This used to be called the North Preston Road, but as the people that you see on the right or left of us moved into this here area, they changed the road to Lake Major Road so they wouldn't be associated with the community at the other end. Associated with the community at the other end. Now,
It's still too loud?
No.
You have to turn that down a little bit.
now, testing. You folks can still hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Now, back to the politics. Here in Nova Scotia, historically, there were two main parties, the Liberal Party and the Progressive Conservative Party. How they compare to the two American parties, I'm not sure. Then there's another, and in the late 50s, early 60s, a new party came up called the New Democrat Party. Now, Percy Paris ran for the New Democrat Party and got elected. In the last provincial election, I believe there were 6 or 7 African Nova Scotians running for the various parties across the province. Percy Paris was the only one that got elected. Here in the Preston area, well, they had like a black person running for the Liberal, a black person running for the Progressive Conservatives, and a white person running for the NDP. Now, the two black politicians running, they split the vote, so that was one of the reasons why they didn't get in. Now, where we're off to now, North Preston. It is the largest of the Indigenous black communities in Canada, and the North Preston has bilingual status. Does anybody have a guess as to what 2 languages?
French and English.
No, not French and English. English and Gullah Geechee. Although I always ask that question, and you'd be surprised how many people say French and English.
Gullah Geechee is exactly what is that, a mixture?
What?
Gullah Geechee is a mixture of Portuguese and maybe African.
Oh. You know where Gullah Geechee comes down and comes down the states?
Oh, like this
South Carolina.
Yeah, well, no, South Carolina.
Yes.
Yes, well, the
Okay,
same
yeah, yeah,
immigrants,
yeah.
the same
Okay.
people have migrated up this way.
What I have? That they were living better.
Oh, okay.
That's why. I had to
What?
go on it.
I don't know.
Now, if you can imagine being snowed in here during the winter, along the coast here in Nova Scotia and in the metro area, we average around 150 centimeters, or just over 1.5 yards of snow. Inland, that's up to 250 centimeters, or just over 2.5 yards of snow. Now, once you pass that bridge back there, we are now into North Preston. And you can see some of the homes ahead of us.
What's the difference?
Someone asked what's the difference.
The difference in the community, she's asking. Never heard of
More country or rural? Like,
You came?
when we got on the bus,
I never heard
the
of
people were saying they're heading out to the country. They meant they're coming out here. Even though today this would be considered the suburbs. And actually, where we're going is very valuable real estate. Well, when the black loyalists first came here, this wasn't considered valuable real estate, and they more or less put the people out here in the woods. They gave them saws and whatnot to cut down the woods for them to build their homes. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the statement, Britannia ruled the waves. Well, how the British Empire ruled the waves during the late... Well, a lot of that wood was wood chopped down by the African Nova Scotians and converted into the ships of the British Empire. Now, up here in North Preston, you'll find the names of Grant, Smith, Kane. I say Kane twice because they're spelled two different ways. Downey, Willis, Simmons.
Okay.
Well, no.
Differently, right?
Yeah, spelled differently. Simons, Symonds, and another spelling. Provo, Smith. I already said Smith, didn't I? At the fort, take a right.
Jackson.
Take a right. No, then you won't find no Jacksons out here in North Preston.
And no Bartons out here?
You'll find Bartons more or less over in Halifax. Although through marriage, Beals, you'll find the name Beals here in North Preston. And take a look at these homes on the right, and you'll catch another look at them as we exit North Preston. Now you can tell the older homes from the newer homes. Like this green one here on the right or the left, it itself is probably 80, 90 years old. But then as the family expanded, they built on the same property. Nelson Winder Elementary School. Now this here is the only all-black elementary school in Canada. And that's due to location in the community, not segregation.
Mixture of teachers, black and white teachers?
No. The principal is black, all the teachers are black.
Going right to the left.
Right down there, yeah.
Simmons Road.
Down, and then
That's the other spelling.
you're turning right across from the church. Right in that parking lot right there, right here on the left.